What if the only person who noticed a sign of life wasn't a doctor, but a janitor? When 22 medical professionals declared a 4-star female general brain dead, no one questioned it until a quiet single dad, mopping the hallway, heard something no machine could measure. A melody, a blink, a miracle hiding in plain sight. This is the true story of how one man's voice awakened more than just a patient. It challenged a system, restored a life, and reminded the world that sometimes healing begins with those we overlook. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, where we tell powerful tales of kindness, courage, and second chances. Now let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Port Haven Military Medical Center buzzed faintly overhead, humming the sterile lullaby of routine. Hallways gleamed, carts rolled, monitors beeped in perfect rhythm. But somewhere between the silence of machines and the noise of certainty, something didn't feel quite right. Ben Lawson pushed his janitor's cart slowly down the East Wing corridor, his boots whispering against the polished tile. He moved like a man who had once marched with purpose and now walked with a weight the world had stopped seeing. His green work jacket was faded at the elbows. A name patch stitched decades ago still clung faintly to the fabric. LAWSON. Few people ever looked close enough to read it. He passed room after room, ICU, recovery, hospice, each with a number, a monitor, a life either holding on or letting go. But as he neared room 407, something pulled at him. The door was ajar. Unusual. Inside, under the sterile white sheets, lay a woman barely clinging to breath. Her uniform, folded neatly on a side table, bore the silver eagle and stars of a 4-star general. Her nameplate read, General Amelia Brooks. Ben stopped. He didn't mean to. His shift was over. But his eyes remained fixed on her face, not out of curiosity, not because of the rank, but because there was something hauntingly familiar in the stillness of her features. He had seen this kind of stillness before, on battlefields, in medevac choppers, in the split second before someone came back, or didn't. He glanced up at the whiteboard beside her bed. Diagnosis: unresponsive coma. Prognosis: no recovery expected. DNR in place. 3 lines. Cold. Clinical. Final. But something in Ben twitched some quiet voice that hadn't spoken in years. He leaned his mop against the wall and stepped in slowly, respectfully. There were no family photos by the bed, no flowers, just monitors blinking in isolation. A decorated hero, and yet, alone. Evening, General, he said softly, half to himself. Rough day. No response, of course. He knelt to pick up a medication chart someone had dropped. As he rose, he caught a flicker of motion in her left hand. A twitch. No, probably just muscle memory. Reflexes. Ben knew the drill. He'd written field reports on it back in Kandahar. Still, he looked at her again. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Face relaxed, but not blank. Eyes closed, but the lids fluttered slightly. Not in rhythm with any machine nearby. He tilted his head. Could be nothing. Could be everything. He exhaled and chuckled to himself. I'm seeing ghosts, he muttered. Again. Ben backed out of the room and resumed pushing his cart. But with every step, his pulse got louder. His military mind, once dormant, began clicking gears. He had seen men in comas flinch at mortar shell echoes. He had seen women wake after weeks with no vitals strong enough to predict it. As he reached the end of the hall, something made him stop again. A memory. 8 years ago. His wife's final day in the hospice wing. The doctors had said she was gone, but he'd held her hand anyway. He'd sung their song anyway. And in her last seconds, she had squeezed back. Just once. But it was enough. He turned around, walked back toward room 407. This time, not as a janitor, Not entirely. Inside the room was still dim. The monitor continued its soft rhythm. Ben took a chair and placed it next to her bed. He sat down, adjusted the IV line gently to untangle it from her arm. Then, almost without thinking, he pulled out his old flip phone, pressed speed dial 1, and waited. The ringtone barely rang once. "Hi, Daddy," a little voice chirped. "Are you done cleaning the sick place yet?" He smiled, eyes softening. "Not yet, sweetheart. Just finishing up one more room. You gonna sing to me, I was hoping you'd ask." And just like that, in a low, warm voice that somehow felt like home, Ben began to sing, "You are my sunshine. My only sunshine. You make me happy. When skies are gray." It wasn't polished. It wasn't loud. But it was steady. And then it happened. General Brooks' eyelid twitched. He paused. Watched. Nothing. He kept singing. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Her fingers shifted slightly. Ben sat up straighter. "Emily, I'll call you right back, okay? Kay. Night-night, Daddy." He hung up and leaned in. "General," he whispered. He watched closely this time, not blinking, not guessing. And when he softly repeated the first few bars of the melody again, he saw it clear as day. Her left eyelid fluttered, then clenched, her jaw tensed. The heart monitor changed by a single digit. "Son of a gun," he whispered. He rose quickly and stepped into the hallway. "Hey," he called out to a passing nurse. "I think she just responded to stimulus." The nurse looked at him blankly. "You're the janitor, right?" Ben nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "But that doesn't change what I saw. Dr. Clarkson and his team already declared her case non-responsive. Please don't interfere with critical patients, sir. I'm not interfering. I was singing to my daughter and saw her eyelid move twice. She reacted to melody. That's a neurological? Sir, please return to your duties." The door shut behind him. Ben stood there for a moment staring at the 407 on the plaque like it was daring him to walk away. He didn't. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Tattered. Old. The same one he used when cataloging injuries in the field a lifetime ago. He wrote down, "Day 1, 21:47 p.m. Subject General Amelia Brooks. Eyelid movement left slight jaw response, 2x during melody. Monitor spike, +1 BPM. No medical acknowledgement. No next of kin presence. Unsupervised." He tapped the pen on the paper and underlined 2 words, "Try again." By morning, the janitor had become a shadow again. Ben Lawson walked the length of the hospital's east corridor, mop in hand, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes forward. His military straightness had long faded into something quieter, something that moved without drawing attention like a breeze through half-open blinds. Nobody looked at the janitor twice, that was the point. But beneath the surface, beneath the worn boots and the calloused hands, was a man who once moved under different orders. A man who used to carry lives in his arms, not garbage bags. A man trained to respond to whispers in the wind, the way a surgeon listens to the silence between heartbeats. He passed the pediatric wing, slowing for a brief second, at a particular door. Room 312. A little girl was inside coloring. His daughter. Emily. She didn't see him, her mother had made sure of that. A court order signed 5 years ago allowed only supervised visits every 3rd Saturday. Today wasn't Saturday, and he wasn't supervised. So he kept walking. He wasn't allowed to knock, wasn't allowed to wave. But it didn't stop him from pausing just long enough to hear the soft sound of her laughter floating faintly through the gap in the door. Then he moved on. Later that afternoon, Ben sat alone at the staff break room table thermos, of lukewarm coffee in hand. Around him, nurses talked politics. A young tech scrolled through his phone. Nobody noticed when Ben pulled out a small leather-bound notebook from his jacket pocket and flipped to the back. Tucked inside the last page was a photo creased from time corners curling. His wedding day. He in dress blues. Rachel, his wife, smiling beneath a veil that glowed like sunlight caught in gauze. And in her arms, an infant swaddled in a blanket with tiny stars on it. Emily. Back then, he believed life could be rebuilt after war. But the battles that came after the ones with custody lawyers and late-night ER visits and sleepless arguments, those were harder and quieter and lonelier. Rachel hadn't been cruel, just tired. Tired of the distance. Tired of waiting. Tired of loving a man who came home with invisible wounds that no metal could heal. When she remarried, she moved across state lines to Port Haven, Virginia. And Ben, stripped of full custody and discharged after declining reassignment, moved too. He took a job at the military hospital not to survive, but to stay close. To be within a hallway of her. To sing to her when no one was listening. And perhaps in some quiet way to remind himself he was still a father. That evening, Ben returned to room 407. This time, he brought a clipboard with a janitorial inspection sheet, an old trick from his field days, useful for moving freely without suspicion. General Amelia Brooks looked exactly the same as the day before. Still pale, perfectly combed hair tucked along her temple like someone had tried to make her appear dignified, even in coma. Ben sat beside her again. Waited. "I know you're in there, General," he whispered. "Maybe no one else does. Maybe they stopped believing a long time ago. But I've seen this before." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, discreet button cam military grade from an old contact, a gift he never thought he'd use again. He clipped it to the pocket flap facing her. "I'm not here to disrespect protocol. I'm here to get the truth. Just show me again." He began to hum. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Amelia's fingers twitched. Subtle, but clear. He noted the time, then whispered again. "That's twice now." But this time, he didn't stop at observation. He left the hospital after his shift and took a bus into the edge of town, stopping at a red brick office, wedged between a bakery and a bail bondsman. A brass plaque read, "Claire Matthews, Attorney at Law, specializing in military and family cases." Ben had stood at that door once before, 5 years ago, asking her to fight for joint custody of his daughter. Claire had fought hard, but the court had decided otherwise. Now he was here for something different. Claire looked up as the door opened. Late 30s, sharp eyes, hair in a messy bun that somehow still looked dignified. She blinked. "Ben Lawson." He nodded. "I haven't seen you since I need your help," he interrupted softly. "Not for custody. For something bigger." She gestured to the chair. "Tell me everything." An hour later, Claire sat with her arms folded, eyes narrowed, processing the last of Ben's words. "You're saying the coma diagnosis might be wrong. I'm saying there are signs no one's documenting. I have footage. And you believe these responses are neurologically significant. I know they are," Ben said firmly. "Micro muscle movements, changes in eye pressure, partial reflexes in response to auditory patterns. These aren't random." She studied him. "You sound like a medic." "I was," he said quietly. 18 years. Special Forces Medical Sergeant, Afghanistan, Iraq, and a dozen places I wasn't allowed to name. She leaned back, stunned. "Why didn't you ever disclose that to the hospital?" "Because I'm just a janitor now. And if I want to stay close to my daughter, I can't risk drawing attention." Claire nodded slowly, understanding more than she let on. "But this woman, General Brooks, she's not just anyone. If she's conscious on any level and misdiagnosed..." Ben nodded. "It means the system failed." Again. There was silence. Then Claire spoke, her voice crisp. "There's a statute under the Federal Military Patient Rights Act, FMPR. If we can prove credible evidence that a diagnosis of vegetative state may be inaccurate, A civilian party can petition for reevaluation. It's rare, but possible. Ben met her eyes. Then we start there. Claire gave a small, approving nod. Send me the footage. I'll prepare a petition. That night, back in his tiny apartment, Ben sat at his desk, surrounded by shadows and memory. His fingers hovered over his phone screen, heart pounding. He clicked send. The email to Claire delivered the first 2 video clips. Clear movements, time-stamped, proof. As the file uploaded, he glanced at the photo of Emily on his bookshelf first-grade picture day, missing tooth smile. I'm doing this for her too, he whispered. Because maybe one day, she'll be the one nobody believes. And I want her to know. Someone always should. He looked out the window. Across town, General Brooks lay in room 407 unmoving, but not untouched, not forgotten. And for the first time in years, something stirred in Ben's heart that he hadn't dared to feel since the war. Hope, room 407, was dim again. Outside, the hospital bustled with its usual dispassion, nurses updating charts, carts rolling across polished linoleum intercoms, paging technicians who no longer paused between tragedies. But inside that room, time had slowed to something more sacred. Ben Lawson stood at the threshold just outside the reach of the dim yellow light from the bedside lamp. He didn't enter right away. His hands gripped a small object wrapped carefully in cloth, something worn, faded, but still breathing with memory. It was a small music box, the kind soldiers sent home during long deployments, delicate yet stubborn, carved from cherry wood with a brass crank. The lid bore a single engraving, "You are my sunshine." Ben stared at it for a long moment before he stepped inside. "Evening, General," he said softly. "I brought something different tonight." Earlier that morning, he had scoured his storage closet, opening old boxes lined with sand-scented uniforms and letters stained with desert dust. Buried beneath field journals and faded photographs, he'd found Emily's old lullaby box. Rachel had returned at once, folded in silence after their final court mediation. Ben remembered winding it in the middle of the night, back when Emily was just a toddler, fussy with fever, her tiny fingers curled around his dog tags. He remembered her smile when the melody played. He remembered peace. And now he hoped to summon that memory in someone else. Someone trapped somewhere between coma and consciousness. Ben approached Amelia's bedside and gently set the music box on her tray. Her face remained still. But he swore, perhaps just imagined, that her breathing deepened ever so slightly, as if waiting. He turned the crank once, a soft, metallic click. "Then you are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The melody creaked into the quiet room like a whisper lost in prayer. Ben watched. First nothing. Then her left thumb moved. A flicker. Barely visible. His breath caught. He took out his small button cam and began recording from his jacket pocket just as he had the night before. He wound the crank again. "You make me happy. When skies are gray." A tremor crossed her brow. Her jaw clenched, brief, involuntary, but undeniable. He leaned closer. "Amelia, if you can hear me, try again." He wound it once more, letting the melody carry through the space like a thread reaching across silence. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." And then her eyes fluttered. Not open, but movement. Rhythmic. Left lid only. He recorded it. Noted the monitor spike heart rate had climbed 3 points. Breath pattern had subtly changed. Ben pulled out a small flashlight. Gently, carefully, he shone it across her pupils. Her left eye constricted. His hand trembled. "No way," he whispered. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't noise in the system. These were cortical responses. Low-level brain engagement. Enough to question every medical note scribbled in her file. Enough to try again. The next morning, he met Claire Matthews at a quiet cafe near the courthouse steps. She looked tired, but sharp hair-up glasses resting on the bridge of her nose as she skimmed her tablet. Ben slid the cam footage across the table. She plugged it in and pressed play. At first she didn't react. Then came the eyelid flutter, the thumb twitch, the pupil constriction, and Claire froze. "My God," she whispered. Ben sat forward. "You see it too?" She nodded slowly. "These aren't random. This is patterned." Ben's voice was low but calm. "I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm asking for a chance." Claire leaned back in her seat and sighed. "With this, we can argue for preliminary review under the FMPR Act. But it's going to be a battle. You're going up against not just a diagnosis, but an institution that hates being wrong." He smiled faintly. "That's what we used to call Tuesday." She gave a dry laugh. "Okay, soldier. Let's shake the tree." By noon, Claire had filed the initial petition. Attached a legal affidavit from Ben, 2 time-stamped video clips, a technical footnote referencing low-frequency response tests in semi-coma patients, and a request for re-evaluation under ethical review, citing possible misdiagnosis. They sent it directly to the Port Haven Ethics Board, knowing it would cause waves. Ben returned to the hospital that evening. He wasn't sure if his badge would still work, but it did. No alarms, no raised eyebrows. Room 407 welcomed him again, as if the walls themselves had grown used to his voice. He sat beside Amelia and pulled the music box from his bag once more. This time, he didn't speak immediately. He just cranked the handle. "You are my sunshine." Her left eye fluttered again. Just once, but unmistakable. "I knew you were still fighting," he whispered, "even if no one else did." He placed his hand lightly over hers, calloused fingers against cold skin. "You were the one they said was incorruptible, the one who started investigating procurement fraud. The helicopter crash wasn't just an accident, was it?" No response. "I read your file," he said. "Classified but sloppy redactions. You were chasing something." The monitor beeped once, slightly faster. Ben narrowed his eyes. "That's what they didn't want to hear, huh? You were getting too close, and now you're here written off." He paused, but not forgotten. At midnight, he emailed Claire one final time for the night. Subject: new footage, plus notable changes attachment. Video for ISO 407 night facial response to auditory pattern verified. Pupil contraction confirmed. Response appears more consistent. We'll continue recording. Please prepare backup submission if this is rejected. I'm not walking away. Ben. Far above him in the administrative wing, a different conversation had begun. The hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Stanley Clark, had received the petition file and was already calling in backup. "Who the hell is this janitor?" he snapped into the phone. On the other end, a dry voice replied, "Nobody with a mop and a military past. But he's making noise. Keep him quiet. He's got an attorney." "I don't care. If this gets out, if she wakes up, it's not just a misdiagnosis. It's liability. Federal." A pause. Then a second voice, gruffer, older. "Then maybe it's time we make sure she doesn't." Click. Back in room 407, Ben remained unaware of the storm quietly gathering above him. He adjusted Amelia's blanket gently and leaned in one last time. "You held the line, General," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." And with that, he stood, collected the music box, and walked out of the room still unseen. But no longer unheard. Ben Lawson had faced sniper fire and Kandahar medevac crashes in Mosul and back alley surgeries in Aleppo, but nothing prepared him for the cold indifference of a hospital boardroom. He sat alone at one end of a long rectangular table inside the administrative wing of Port Haven Military Medical Center. Overhead, fluorescents cast a harsh bluish light. The clock on the wall ticked, with the mechanical calm of a world that didn't care about miracles, only paperwork. Across from him sat Dr. Stanley Clark, chief of neurology, flanked by 2 junior physicians and a legal representative from the hospital's risk assessment team. Their faces were smooth, their eyes tired, their patience thin. Dr. Clark shuffled through Ben's submitted petition and stopped at a still image, a freeze frame of Amelia Brooks' left eye fluttering. This, he said flatly, could be involuntary muscle movement. Ben nodded slowly. That's why I recorded patterns over time, with stimulus. You're not licensed. You're not part of her care team. You're a janitor. I'm also a former Special Forces medic with 21 confirmed battlefield revivals. And what I recorded was not reflex, it was response. A silence settled in. Clark leaned back. We have a coma scale, Mr. Lawson, a real one, and trained professionals use it. Her score hasn't changed. Ben reached into his jacket and placed a small printed chart on the table. It was a log time-stamped, annotated with corresponding video frames. Your scale didn't account for music, Ben said. It didn't test for emotional memory triggers. It didn't even include lateral pupil response under voice recognition. I did. You're not authorized to. I wasn't trying to be a hero, Ben interrupted. I was trying to tell you that your patient, the one you all declared hopeless, is reacting. That should matter. Dr. Clark's jaw tightened. From the back of the room, a calm voice interjected. He's right. All heads turned as Claire Matthews entered legal folder in hand. The FMPR Act gives any concerned civilian with documented evidence the right to petition for reevaluation when medical neglect is suspected, she said. And what we have here is more than enough for preliminary consideration. Dr. Clark stood. This isn't a courtroom, Miss Matthews. No, she replied coolly. But it might be. Later that afternoon, Ben stood outside the hospital's chapel, staring at the small bronze plaque on the wall, in honor of the unseen battles. He closed his eyes. The conversation with Clark had rattled him more than he expected. He hadn't realized how much he still feared authority, not the bullets and bars kind, but the kind that wore white coats and wielded clipboards like gavels. He'd lived under judgment since the day Rachel left, since the court assumed his past trauma made him unstable, since the VA lost his paperwork, his benefits, his dignity, but not his instincts. He looked down at the folded manila envelope Claire had slipped him after the meeting. Open it when you're ready, she'd said. It might help. He sat on the bench, tore the seal, and pulled out several documents. Page 1. A list of the original trauma team who had worked on Amelia Brooks. Page 2. Internal shift schedules, showing a 43-minute gap in EEG monitoring during her 3rd night, right before she was declared unresponsive. Page 3. A redacted report on a procurement corruption investigation, Amelia's name circled. Ben's brow furrowed. There it was, buried in bureaucracy and buried again in silence. The general hadn't just crashed. She'd been digging too deep and someone had wanted her buried for good. But now, she had a witness. That night, Ben returned to room 407 with a new purpose. He brought nothing with him except a voice. He sat beside Amelia and leaned in close. You were chasing something, weren't you? He whispered. A trail of money, maybe. A contractor skimming funds. Something that touched people with too many stars on their collars. He paused. Then the crash. A diagnosis. Silence. He took her hand gently. I don't think you were just a victim. I think you're a threat. And someone hoped no one would ever see the signs. The monitor beeped softly, heart rate rising. Ben smiled. But I see you. Over the next 3 days, Ben recorded everything. He rotated music, her Air Force ceremonial anthem, the Morse code rhythm for victory, even the sounds of Black Hawk rotors, at low frequency, anything to test memory response. Each time she showed something, he cataloged it meticulously, uploaded it to Claire nightly, and continued to build the case, one blink, one breath, one twitch at a time. But with every new reaction, the hospital grew colder toward him. His access badge stopped working after 9 p.m. His mop cart was moved to a different wing. Staff who once smiled now looked the other way. And then on Friday evening, Ben returned to room 407 and found a nurse standing outside with her arms folded. "You're not allowed in here anymore." He froze. "Excuse me, Dr. Clark's orders. Family only. Or authorized personnel." Ben stepped back, confused. I've been coming here every night for almost 2 weeks." "Doesn't matter," she said, avoiding eye contact. New protocol. Ben clenched his jaw. Did something happen? Did she regress? I'm not at liberty to say. "She's my responsibility. She's not your anything." "Mr. Lawson," a voice said behind him. Dr. Clark, smug, calm, icy. "You've violated hospital protocol. You've tampered with medical equipment. You've recorded without patient consent. If it weren't for your lawyer, you'd already be facing trespassing charges." Ben stared at him. "You're scared." Clark's smile didn't waver. "I'm protecting this institution from liability." "No, you're protecting yourself from the truth." A pause. Then Ben whispered, "She's going to wake up, and when she does, she'll remember." Dr. Clark's smile faded, just for a second, and that was enough. Ben turned and walked away, but not in defeat, in preparation. Because the signs the doctors had missed weren't just physical. They were legal. They were ethical. And soon they would be undeniable. The petition hit the Port Haven Hospital Administration like a silent detonation. No alarms, no sirens, just a sudden shift in the air that everyone felt, but no one spoke of. At 9:06 a.m., a formal envelope bearing the watermark of the Federal Military Patient Rights Act, FMPR, was signed and stamped. Filed under expedited ethical review, the motion was clear. Request to reevaluate coma diagnosis and authorize an experimental stimulus protocol for General Amelia Brooks, citing observed response patterns, video documentation, and potential medical negligence. Attached were 4 exhibits. Ben's recordings, nurse logs showing inconsistencies in EEG scans, Claire's written motion, and a formal declaration signed by Ben. "I am not acting as a doctor. I am acting as a witness, and I believe she is still fighting to live." The motion landed directly on the desk of Dr. Margaret Ellis, Senior Neurosurgeon Emerita and Chair of the hospital's Internal Ethics Board. Dr. Ellis was in her late 60s, silver-haired, quiet-spoken, and widely respected a woman, known less for titles and more for truths. She had trained half the hospital's senior neurologists, including Dr. Stanley Clark. And unlike Clark, she never confused silence for consent. As she read through the documents, her fingers paused over one frame, Amelia's eye fluttering in response to music. She watched the clip 3 times, then closed her laptop and called for an emergency meeting. That afternoon, the ethics board convened behind closed doors. 9 people, 3 physicians, 2 legal observers, 2 veteran advocates, 1 trauma psychologist, and 1 chair, Dr. Ellis herself. Claire Matthews stood at one end of the conference table. Her demeanor was calm, precise. Ben stood beside her in clean jeans and a tucked-in shirt, but the green janitor's jacket still hung from his arm like a badge of honor. His face was steady, but his fingers were clasped tightly behind his back. Across from them sat Dr. Clark, his arms folded, flanked by hospital counsel. Ellis opened the session. "We're here to evaluate whether the current classification of General Amelia Brooks as a non-responsive coma should be reconsidered. Counselor Matthews, you may begin." Claire stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, what we present here today is not a miracle. It's data. Documented, observable, repeatable. General Brooks is responding visually, physically, neurologically to environmental stimuli. Not once, not coincidentally, but consistently. She gestured toward the screen as Ben cued the footage. Slide by slide, they watched Amelia's subtle reactions. Pupils constricting, eyelids twitching, breathing rates shifting during the lullaby's melody. Claire continued, "We aren't asking for invasive surgery. We're asking for authorization to attempt a controlled waking stimulus protocol monitored by hospital staff within ethical parameters. Not as a treatment, as a test." Clark leaned forward. "And I remind this board that none of these observations were made by licensed physicians." Ben stepped up. "With all due respect, I served 4 tours as a combat medic. I've kept men alive on the floor of Humvees while bullets rattled the doors. I know the difference between reflex and recognition. I didn't come here to grandstand. I came because I saw her trying." A veteran advocate on the board asked, why didn't the staff observe these signs before Ben's voice didn't waver? Because they weren't looking. They weren't listening. They declared her gone and stopped asking if she wanted to come back. Silence settled over the room. Dr. Ellis spoke quietly. "Dr. Clark, what is your objection to a non-invasive auditory stimulus under supervision?" Clark's eyes narrowed. "Because it sets a dangerous precedent. If we challenge every diagnosis based on gut instinct and music boxes, we open the door to lawsuits, media scrutiny, and a collapse in institutional trust." Ellis nodded slowly. "So your concern is legal exposure, not the patient's chance to wake?" Clark said nothing. Ellis looked down at her notes. "Let's vote." The board members wrote on folded slips of paper. One by one, they dropped them into a simple wooden box. Ellis opened each in silence. 1, 2, 3. The final tally, 5-4. The room inhaled. Ellis looked up. Motion approved. The hospital will authorize a supervised trial of stimulus-based awakening methods for General Amelia Brooks, effective immediately. Procedure must be monitored by licensed staff and legal counsel. Claire closed her eyes briefly in quiet relief. Ben stood motionless. Clark stormed out. 2 hours later, room 407 transformed. Medical technicians checked vitals. A trauma neurologist positioned a portable EEG machine next to Amelia's bed. Claire sat in the corner, clipboard in hand. Ben stood beside the bed, the small music box in his hand. Dr. Ellis entered and nodded gently. "You may begin." Ben took a breath, stepped closer, and wound the box. The familiar tune began. "You Are My Sunshine." Everyone watched. No one blinked. Second measure. Third. Nothing. Then a flicker. The EEG monitor jumped. Ben leaned in. "Amelia," he whispered. "If you can hear me, give them something they can't ignore." Her hand shifted, her fingers moved, and curled around his. The room fell into stunned silence. The trauma neurologist gasped, leaning in. "That's volitional grip." Dr. Ellis stepped forward. "That is not coma-level response. That is awareness." Ben's voice broke slightly. "She's coming back." That evening, Ben walked out of room 407 and stood in the hallway, eyes closed. For the first time in a decade, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own country. He felt seen. Behind him, Dr. Ellis caught up. "You did more than save her," she said. "You reminded all of us why we do this." Ben turned. It was never about proving anyone wrong, just proving she wasn't lost. Ellis smiled softly. "She's lucky you were mopping that floor." He nodded. "I wasn't supposed to be. I was covering for a kid with the flu." She chuckled. "Fate has a funny way of showing up in utility closets." Ben looked through the glass at Amelia's now moving hand. "She's not done yet," he said. Neither was he. The morning after the awakening trial, whispers began to fill the corridors of Port Haven Military Medical Center, like smoke from a distant fire. Not everyone had seen the video, but everyone had heard the story. The janitor made her move. She gripped his hand. She reacted to a song. Rumors moved faster than facts, and in a place built on routine and rank uncertainty was the enemy. Ben Lawson stood by the vending machine, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, his janitor badge still clipped to his belt like an afterthought. He sipped slowly, eyes scanning the corridor like he used to scan rooftops for snipers. Not for threats, but for signs. He knew that the moment General Amelia Brooks closed her hand around his, the war had changed. This wasn't about coma anymore. This was about accountability. Across the hospital campus, inside a secure meeting room with soundproof walls, the ethics board reconvened. Though the vote had passed 5-4 the day before, it had rattled the institution more than expected. Not because the test had failed, but because it had succeeded. And success demanded explanation. Dr. Margaret Ellis sat at the head of the table, hands folded. Her expression was unreadable. To her right sat Dr. Rachel Patel, one of the hospital's senior neurologists, and one of the 4 who had voted against the petition. Her voice was sharp, clipped. One finger twitch and a grip does not equal full awareness. Ellis replied evenly. It wasn't one movement. It was 2 movements, timed to a known stimulus observed and recorded under EEG monitoring with both visual and tactile response. That's clinical significance. Dr. Patel crossed her arms. And what happens when the press gets hold of this? When they say we declared a decorated 4-star general as hopeless, when she was in fact responsive, one of the veteran advocates leaned forward. Then maybe the press is the least of our problems. Ellis said nothing for a long moment. Then she spoke quietly but firmly. This board was never meant to protect reputations, was meant to protect life. The moment we forget that we've failed more than just one patient. The room fell silent. Then Dr. Patel stood abruptly. If we're going to allow janitors to dictate medical policy, then maybe it's time we reevaluate who belongs on this board. And with that, she walked out. Ben was sweeping the hallway outside the physical therapy wing when Claire Matthews found him. She had dark circles under her eyes and a folder clutched to her chest like a shield. They're splitting, she said without preamble. Ben looked up. Who the ethics board? Patel resigned this morning. 2 others may follow. Clark is using it to build a case that the board's compromised and can't act in good faith. Ben leaned on the handle of his broom. Of course he is. Claire sighed. We were given temporary approval for the stimulus protocol, but it's being challenged. If they suspend the board's authority, all treatment halts. Immediately. Ben frowned. But we proved she's in there, that she's fighting. That's not what they care about. They care about precedent and power. Ben's jaw tensed. Then maybe it's time they see what the truth actually looks like. That night, Claire called in a favor from an old contact at Channel 12 News, a small but respected station run by a former military spouse with a reputation for fearless reporting. They didn't pitch a scandal. They pitched a story. Just a quiet segment. No names, no hospital logos, just one image. A still frame of a hand, Amelia's curling around another hand, and one quote from Ben Lawson. Sometimes the only thing someone needs to come back is someone who still believes they can. The segment aired during the 10 o'clock local news, and by sunrise it had gone viral. Social media lit up with hashtags. Wake up Amelia. One hand can save. A hero. The janitor who believed veteran forums exploded with support. Former medics from 3 generations posted their own stories of moments tiny, imperceptible, when a twitch had meant life. Gold Star families wrote in to say thank you. And quietly, in a small apartment filled with second-hand furniture and war medals tucked away in drawers. Ben watched it all from his couch, stunned. Emily, watching from her mother's home across town, saw it too. Her little voice echoed through the screen door as she called for her mom. "That's Daddy. That's Daddy's voice." By Monday morning, the hospital was swarmed. Journalists didn't get past the gate, but the message had. Inside room 407, something else had changed. General Brooks wasn't just squeezing hands now. Her eyes had begun fluttering more regularly, her facial muscles engaged during certain songs, and twice under soft voice prompts from Ben, she had shifted her head to the right. She was moving toward the surface, but time was running out. Dr. Clark issued an internal memorandum citing increasing media pressure and ethical ambiguity, recommending a pause on all stimulus activity until a full administrative review could be conducted. Claire was livid. "This is obstruction," she told Ben. "They're afraid if she wakes up, she'll talk about what she was investigating before the crash. Procurement fraud, internal sabotage, maybe even something bigger." Ben nodded grimly. "Which means the closer we get, the harder they'll push back. But we're not backing down." He looked her in the eye. "No, we're not." At noon, Claire and Ben walked into the ethics board chambers again, this time not to plead, but to defend. Claire stood before the fractured board and laid down a new petition. Formal request to continue General Brooks's treatment under temporary judicial oversight, bypassing hospital suspension protocols under the Military Patient Emergency Protection Clause, MPEPC. It was rare, it was risky, and it had never been used at Port Haven. But in this moment, it was the only card left. Dr. Ellis looked across the table at Ben. "Mr. Lawson," she said quietly, "you've shaken a sleeping system, and you've made enemies." Ben straightened. "Not enemies, just people who forgot what their oath meant." Ellis gave the faintest smile, and then she cast her vote. It began with silence, not the kind that fills hospital rooms when hope has left, but the kind that lingers just before a soul returns. A stillness so complete, even the heart monitors seemed to hold their breath. Room 407 was dim once more, but different. There were no machines beeping impatiently, no nurses tapping iPads, no sterile interruptions. Just a single chair pulled close to the bedside and a man who refused to stop believing. Ben Lawson sat with both hands folded over his lap, head bowed slightly as if praying, but he wasn't praying. He was listening. The music box lay quietly on the tray table. Its crank had worn smooth from use. Beside him, General Amelia Brooks rested, her body still, but no longer vacant. The ripple of her presence filled the air, tangible, now real, like the faint scent of lavender on an old letter. Since the last stimulus trial, her responses had grown stronger, more rhythmic. A grip, a head turn, a partial murmur during a therapy session. But today, Ben had come for more than another test. He had come for her. Outside the room, the hospital was under siege, not from violence, but from headlines. 4-star General awakens. Under janitor's care, Port Haven Ethics Board. Under scrutiny. 1 man, 1 song, 1 miracle. The hospital administration had tried to downplay it, but truth once sung into life couldn't be silenced. The board remained split. Claire had secured temporary judicial protection for Amelia's care, and Dr. Ellis had been named acting medical proxy until the internal review concluded. And through it all, Ben had waited, not to be proven right, but to bring her back. He opened the music box. The first crank was hesitant, the second was steady. Then came the melody. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." His voice was low, hoarse, with emotion but certain. He sang not as a performer, but as a father, as a medic, as a man who knew that sound could be stronger than silence. "You make me happy, when skies are gray." She stirred, her lips parted slightly. A tremor passed over her brow. Ben didn't stop. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Her breathing changed. The monitor pinged. A rhythm shift, slow but unmistakable. Ben stood, leaned close, his hand gently brushing the back of hers. "You're here, Amelia," he whispered. "I know you are." Her fingers curled slightly, not tight, but unmistakable. Muscle memory. Intent. Then, a soft exhale. Her eyelids fluttered once, then again. And then her eyes opened. It was not sudden. It was not cinematic. It was quiet, like sunrise. Her eyes moved, slowly blinking against the soft light, unfocused at first. Then they settled. On him. Ben froze. He hadn't prepared for this part. Not the way he should have. He had written speeches in his head, imagined emotional things he might say if she ever came back. But now all he could manage was a breathless whisper. "Amelia." Her lips moved. No sound at first. Then softly, hoarse and broken but deliberate. "You might still sing that song." His knees gave slightly, but he caught himself, then smiled through eyes already wet. I never stopped. A long pause. Then she blinked again, slower this time, her gaze focusing her voice, dry as paper, but clearer. "Who are you?" Ben hesitated, heart pounding. "I was your janitor, but I used to be someone else." She tried to speak again, but her head tilted, wincing at the effort. Ben squeezed her hand gently. "Shh. Don't push it." She looked at him like someone fighting through fog. But behind that fog, something sparked. Recognition. Not yet. But connection. She didn't know his name, but she knew she was safe. Minutes later, a nurse entered and nearly dropped her clipboard when she saw Amelia's open eyes. Moments after that, the room filled Dr. Ellis, 2 trauma specialists, a respiratory tech. Claire arrived soon after, breathless, eyes wide. And Ben stepped back, letting them surround the bed, letting the world catch up to what had just happened. He stood by the window as doctors tested responses, light, sound, movement. All slow, all delicate, but all there. Claire moved beside him. "You did it." He shook his head. "She did it. I just stayed long enough to hear her knocking." Claire smiled, eyes glistening. "Ben." He looked over. "I've represented hundreds of patients," she said quietly, "and I've seen a lot of systems give up on people. But I've never seen someone fight so hard for someone they didn't even know." He swallowed hard. "I didn't have to know her. I saw what everyone else missed. And maybe I just didn't want to fail another person who couldn't speak for themselves." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. "She remembers the song." He nodded. That's what pulled her back. As the room settled, Dr. Ellis approached her, tone clinical, but her eyes warm. "We'll start her on a low-resistance cognitive stimulation protocol. She'll need speech therapy, mobility sessions. It'll take time." "She has it," Ben replied. Ellis paused. "Not everyone in the administration is happy about this. Some want to argue that this wasn't your place, that you intervened beyond your role." Ben gave a faint, tired smile. "Let them. They'll come after your job. I didn't take this job to mop floors," he said. "I took it to stay close to someone I loved. And somehow, I ended up helping someone else find their way home." Ellis studied him for a long beat. "There's a place for people like you, Ben. But it's not in the shadows." He raised an eyebrow. "Where is it then?" She handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" "A letter. From the Pentagon." That night, Ben sat in his apartment holding the unopened envelope in one hand and a framed photo of Emily in the other. His voice cracked slightly as he whispered, "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." And across town, in room 407, Amelia Brooks whispered the same line, barely audible, but alive. But By dawn, room 407 had a security guard, not to keep people out, but to keep the moment in. The hospital, once skeptical and clinical, had become a shrine of hushed reverence. Nurses peeked through the glass to catch a glimpse of the miracle no textbook had prepared them for General Amelia Brooks alive and watching them back. But as Amelia's condition moved toward recovery, the storm Ben had long predicted finally arrived this time with papers, not sirens. At 8:42 a.m., a formal internal investigation was launched by the Port Haven Medical Governance Committee. Allegation unauthorized engagement and interference with the treatment of a high-ranking patient by an unlicensed employee with undisclosed military background and lack of declared conflict of interest. In bold at the bottom of the memo, subject Lawson Benjamin I. Ben was mopping the corner near the elevator bank when his supervisor approached, a tall, soft-spoken veteran named Hank Reynolds. Hank held the printed notice in his hand like it was radioactive. "Ben," he muttered. "I didn't want to be the one to give you this." Ben wiped his hands on his uniform pants. "Then don't." But Hank extended it anyway. Came from upstairs. Risk Division. Ben unfolded the letter and skimmed the first paragraph. He let out a dry breath. "There it is. They're suspending your access badge," Hank added. "Effective immediately." Ben nodded. "Tell Emily I'm sorry I missed her floor this week." Hank tried to smile, failed, and clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You did something good here. That scares people more than failure ever did." Ben said nothing. He didn't need to. In Claire's office downtown, the blinds were half drawn, and legal briefs scattered her desk like chess pieces on a battlefield. "This is retaliation," she said, pacing. "They're not coming after you because of what you did wrong. They're coming because of what you did right." Ben sat across from her, hands folded. "They're saying I withheld military credentials." "Well, did you?" "I didn't hide it. But I didn't put it on the janitor application either." "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because I didn't want to be saluted. I just wanted to sweep floors and stay close to my daughter." Claire's voice softened. "And now that decision might cost you more than your job." Ben shrugged. "I've lost bigger things." She picked up a thick folder. "They're also citing you for unauthorized medical recordings. You filmed her responses before formal approval." Ben looked up. "If I hadn't, she'd still be comatose." "I know," Claire replied. "But truth doesn't always win by itself." She dropped the folder on the desk. "So I'm filing a countersuit." Ben blinked. "For what?" "For whistleblower protection under Title 38, Section 30 of TLTRDCC. You witnessed medical negligence. You documented it. And they're punishing you for it." Ben's brow furrowed. "But whistleblowers are usually insiders, employees. You are an employee, and your evidence saved a life." Ben leaned back in the chair. "What if Amelia sides with the hospital?" Claire tilted her head. "Do you think she will?" Ben was quiet for a long beat. No. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Amelia Brooks was progressing faster than anyone predicted. Physical therapy had begun, light arm movements, assisted leg extensions, speech exercises. Her memory came back in fragments, like lights flickering on across a dark city. She remembered the crash. She remembered the last memo she sent. She remembered the melody. And she remembered a man's voice before the light came back. "You make me happy when skies are gray." But no one would tell her where that voice had gone. Until she asked. "Where's?" The man she rasped to Dr. Ellis. The janitor Ellis sighed. "Removed. Pending investigation." Amelia frowned weakly. "He was the one." The first voice. Ellis nodded. "We know." The following day, Claire received a phone call from a restricted number. She answered on speaker. "Miss Matthews," a warm, authoritative female voice came through. "This is General Amelia Brooks." Claire straightened immediately. "General, it's good to hear your voice. I'd like to meet with you," Amelia said. "And with Ben Lawson." Claire glanced at Ben, who sat quietly on the other side of the room, drinking coffee from a chipped mug. "He's here," Claire replied. "And I think he'd like that." They met in a private rehab suite. Amelia wore a loose navy sweatshirt, her hair cropped shorter now, a scar visible near her left temple. Her voice was low but strong. Ben walked in and stood still, suddenly unsure how to greet a woman he'd watched in silence for weeks, spoken to when she couldn't hear, and helped when she couldn't move. She broke the moment. "You were singing?" Ben nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I thought it was a memory." He smiled faintly. It kind of was. She motioned to the chair beside her bed. "Come closer, Sergeant." He froze. She smiled. "I remember your file. I read it when you were hired. You knew I knew something. Your posture gave you away the first week. But I also saw a man grieving. So I let you be." Ben sat down. And now Amelia looked him in the eye. "You brought me back. Not medicine. Not machines. You." He lowered his gaze. "They're trying to fire me. Then I'll speak. Speaking may cost you allies." She gave a soft, tired laugh. "Then it's a good day to make new ones." That evening, a press release was issued on official military letterhead. General Amelia Brooks, upon regaining partial cognitive and verbal function, formally acknowledges and confirms that her first consistent response was to auditory stimuli, delivered by Mr. Benjamin Lawson, former Special Forces combat medic and current staff janitor at Port Haven Medical Center. His actions did not violate care. They redefined it. The statement went viral in under 2 hours. By morning, Ben's suspension was under formal review, and Claire's whistleblower case was assigned a federal judge. In the rehab wing, Amelia practiced grip strength with a physical therapist. In her hand was a soft ball. In her heart was a song. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Her voice cracked, but she smiled anyway. The room was not a courtroom in the traditional sense. No marble pillars, no jury box, no gavels. But in this sterile conference hall inside the Department of Military Medical Oversight, the weight of justice hung just as heavy. At a long oval table lined with Pentagon officials, hospital administrators, legal observers, and military ethicists, a hearing had been called to determine the fate of 3 things. 1. The status of General Amelia Brooks' diagnosis and care. 2. The accountability of Port Haven's medical leadership. 3. The future of one man. Ben Lawson, janitor, combat medic, father, and now reluctant symbol of something bigger. Ben sat beside Claire Matthews, his lawyer, and only consistent ally outside of room 407. He wore a clean gray shirt, no tie, his hands folded tight. He did not fidget. Across the room sat Dr. Stanley Clark, arms crossed, flanked by 2 attorneys who whispered as if they already expected to lose. The hospital's PR representative sat nearby, expression blank. The chair of the hearing, Colonel Dana Pierce, cleared her throat. "This hearing will assess whether care standards at Port Haven Military Medical Center were compromised, whether patient rights under the FMPR Act were violated, and whether Mr. Lawson acted within reasonable moral and legal grounds under whistleblower protection." She turned. "Miss Matthews, your witness may begin." Claire stood calm and professional. I called to the stand General Amelia Brooks. Gasps rippled across the room. Dr. Clark stood. "Objection. General Brooks is a recovering patient. She is legally lucid communicative and was cleared this morning by a military neurologist," Claire cut in. "If you're afraid of what she'll say, you should have made better decisions." The colonel nodded. Objection overruled. "Bring her in." And then, silence. The door opened, and there she was, General Amelia Brooks in full uniform, her stars gleaming despite the visible weakness in her gait. She walked slowly, assisted by a cane, but she walked. And the room stood still. Even Dr. Clark's jaw clenched. Amelia took the stand and sat down, with dignity catching her breath. Claire approached gently. "General Brooks, thank you for being here." Amelia nodded. "I insisted. Can you confirm your identity and rank for the record?" General Amelia Margaret Brooks, 4-star General, United States Air Force, currently assigned to independent recovery status. Claire paced slowly. "General, do you remember the accident?" Amelia blinked steady. "I remember the sound of the rotors failing. I remember darkness, pain. Then, music." Claire paused. "Music." Amelia smiled faintly. "Melody. One that reached further than machines could. One that made me remember who I was." Claire lowered her voice. "Who was singing?" Amelia didn't hesitate. "The janitor. Ben Lawson." A quiet murmur passed through the room. Claire continued. "Did hospital staff recognize your response?" "No," Amelia said. "Only him. And he didn't stop. He kept singing when everyone else had stopped seeing me. Do you believe Mr. Lawson violated your care?" Amelia looked toward Ben and shook her head firm. He honored it. More than any protocol did. Claire straightened. "What do you believe would have happened had he not acted?" Amelia's voice grew quieter, but stronger. "I would still be in that bed, alive but discarded." Another silence, not from discomfort, but reverence. Claire stepped back. No further questions. The colonel nodded. Cross-examination. Dr. Clark rose slowly. "General Brooks, are you aware that Mr. Lawson is not licensed to perform any medical function?" Amelia lifted an eyebrow. "Are you aware that he saved me when your team gave up?" Clark stiffened. "We followed every clinical guideline and ignored every human signal," she said flatly. "You had the data, but no courage." Clark's mouth opened, closed. No further questions. Outside the hearing room, a small crowd had gathered, veterans, hospital staff, and members of the press waiting for news. Inside, the colonel leaned forward. "This committee has heard the testimony. We've reviewed the video, read the statements, and examined the timeline. A decision will be issued within 72 hours. Claire stood. Request for immediate relief, restoration of Mr. Lawson's employment, and access to his daughter's visitation schedule. The colonel turned to Ben. "You've shaken a system most men wouldn't dare question." Ben looked up. Calm. "I didn't question it for myself," he said. "I questioned it because a woman was locked inside her own body, and no one knocked on the door." The colonel nodded. Request granted. Later that day, Ben stepped out into the sunlight. For the first time in months, he walked through the front gates of Port Haven, not as a man under scrutiny, but as a man vindicated. Claire joined him, exhaling. "We may not win everything, but they can't undo what just happened in that room." Ben nodded. "It's not about winning. It's about waking people up." Just then, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Sergeant." He turned. Amelia, still in uniform, walking toward him. She stopped, lifted her hand, and saluted. Ben blinked. "General, I don't salute janitors," she said, "but I damn sure salute the man who reminded me who I was." Ben smiled and returned the salute. They stood like that under the wide Virginia sky, soldier to soldier, survivor to survivor. That night, Ben tucked a small envelope into his daughter's backpack. Inside was a note. "They tried to silence a song, but you can't silence what was never meant to be forgotten. Love, Dad." It arrived in an unmarked envelope. No seals, no red tape, just thick ivory paper folded perfectly and delivered by hand to the front desk of a modest apartment complex 3 blocks from the hospital. Ben Lawson found it tucked into his mailbox between a supermarket flyer and a utilities bill. The return address simply read, Department of the Air Force, Office of Veteran Affairs. He stood there in silence, holding the envelope with the reverence of a man who knew what silence cost, and what it gave back. Inside his apartment, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, catching dust motes mid-air. The small space smelled of fresh coffee and engine oil, his two constants. Ben sat down at the kitchen table, unfolded the letter, and began to read. Mr. Benjamin Andrew Lawson. On behalf of the Department of the Air Force and the Office of Military Veteran Affairs, this letter serves as formal acknowledgement of your prior service record, which upon review includes 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 deployment in classified operational zones under Joint Special Operations Command, honorable discharge due to family hardship. In light of recent public and internal investigations, and per the testimony of General Amelia Brooks, we are issuing the following: 1. Immediate restoration of honorable military status. 2. Official commendation for field conduct in the civilian sector under Title 38, Section 1151-3. Invitation to join the Veteran Medical Advisory Program with full access to military benefits, pension reinstatement, and civilian military liaison options. Your actions exemplified the highest values of service compassion and sacrifice. We failed to recognize them in time. We will not fail again. Signed, Dana Brooks, Brigadier General Office of Veteran Advocacy Department of the Air Force. Ben finished reading and lowered the letter gently onto the table. Then he closed his eyes. Not from pride, but from relief. He hadn't asked for restoration. He'd only asked to matter. Now someone finally said, "You do." Later that day, Ben returned to Port Haven, not as a janitor, not as a whistleblower, but as a man who belonged. Claire met him at the gate holding a file under one arm and a grin she couldn't suppress. "You clean up nice," she said. "I'm not even wearing anything different," Ben replied. "That's what makes it terrifying," she joked. "Come on, she's waiting." Inside the physical therapy wing, General Amelia Brooks sat in a wheelchair by the window, bathed in soft, late afternoon light. Her hair had grown in just enough to frame her face. The cane now rested beside her, not in her hand. She looked up as Ben entered. "You got the letter," she said without needing to ask. He nodded. Didn't expect it to feel like closure? "It's not," she replied. "It's permission to start something new." Ben sat down across from her. You remembered everything he asked, most of it. Some still comes in fragments, but I remember the crash, the report I was writing, the names I was following, and then the quiet, until your voice, he chuckled. I wasn't trying to wake a general, just comfort a stranger. Amelia's voice softened. You didn't comfort me. You anchored me. She turned toward the window. They told me I have a choice. Retire with honors, or resume duty in an advisory capacity. Ben tilted his head. And I'm choosing, neither, she said. I want to do something that matters. Something human. She looked back at him. What if we built something? Together, Ben blinked. Like what A sent her. For veterans. For their families. For people like us who've survived things without bullet holes but just as deep. He stared at her. You're serious. I've already put in for a grant. And I want you on the board. Not as staff. As co-founder? He laughed. You trust a janitor to run a recovery center. I trust a man who believed in music when medicine failed. 1 week later, in a modest white building with chipped paint and history in its bones, Ben and Amelia stood before a group of veterans therapists and community leaders. They called it the Sunrise Room. No rank, no uniforms, no protocols, just healing. Inside the center, a small plaque hung on the wall near the entrance, for those who never stopped listening, and beneath it, a quote in script. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest hope. BAL. At the opening ceremony, Amelia spoke first. Not long ago, I was a headline, she began. Now I'm just a human being learning to walk again, not just with my legs, but with trust. And this man beside me reminded me how. Then she turned to Ben. He took the microphone awkwardly. I never planned to build anything. I just wanted to be near my daughter. I didn't expect to be here in front of all of you. But what I've learned, what we've lived, is that hope doesn't always arrive in uniforms. Sometimes it comes on mop wheels and lullabies. There was silence, and then applause. Slow, rising. Not for what he did, but for why. That night, Ben walked alone down the quiet hallway of the new center. The walls were still bare. The air smelled of fresh paint. But in the corner of the main room, one thing already felt like home. The old music box. He picked it up and turned the crank. The melody began again. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. And from across the room, a child's voice picked it up. Daddy, he turned. Emily ran toward him, laughing, arms wide. He caught her mid-run, holding her tight. Her eyes sparkled. Mom said I could visit every week now. He smiled through tears. That's right, sweetheart. And as the music played on, Ben closed his eyes, holding his daughter close. Not everything broken needs fixing. Some things just need to be heard. 1 year later. The sun rose slowly over the blue ridgeline of Virginia, pouring golden light across the front steps of a white brick building with wide windows and a weathered American flag waving gently above the door. The sign out front read, "The Sunrise Room, a healing center for veterans and their families." Below it, a newer bronze plaque had been added. No titles, no ranks, just 4 words etched into metal where music found the lost. Inside, a small gathering had begun. Folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, veterans in flannel shirts, some missing limbs, others just missing silence. But all of them carried the same thing, memory. And today, they came to honor the 2 people who turned their private pain into public hope. Ben Lawson stood at the back of the room, quietly adjusting the collar of his shirt. He was still the same man, quiet, steady, but there was a brightness behind his eyes now, a sense of place, of peace. Emily stood beside him now, 9 holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Thank you for helping my daddy help others." He smiled and gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did your part too, kiddo." She beamed. "I told everyone you were a hero." Ben chuckled. "Heroes don't mop floors." She scrunched her nose. "But you mop hearts." He blinked, stunned by the wisdom only children carry. Across the room, General Amelia Brooks walked slowly to the small podium at the front. She no longer used a cane. Her stride was measured but strong, like a woman who had rebuilt herself one nerve at a time. She tapped the microphone gently. The room hushed. "I was once taught," she began, "that rank was the highest form of honor. That to lead meant never to break." She paused. "But I was wrong. The highest form of honor is to let someone see you broken and trust them to stay." Her voice was clear, resolute, earned. "I am alive today not because of protocol or privilege, but because one man kept singing into the dark long after everyone else stopped listening." She turned slightly. "Ben," he froze. She motioned gently. "Come up here." He stepped forward. No uniform, no ceremony. Just denim and flannel, and something sacred behind the quiet in his chest. He joined her on stage. Amelia smiled and reached into her coat pocket. From it, she pulled out a small velvet box. Ben frowned. "What's this?" "A joke, really," she said. "But one that matters." She opened the box to reveal a military challenge coin custom-made, engraved with a single phrase, for service without orders. She placed it in his palm. You never needed rank to lead, she said. And now the whole world knows it. Ben stared at the coin, his hand trembling slightly. I was just trying to sing my daughter to sleep, he whispered. Amelia leaned close, and in doing so, you woke me. The crowd stood and applauded, not loud, not raucous, but deeply human. A sound of healing, of thanks. Ben stepped back, blinking against the emotion rising in his chest. But then Amelia raised her hand again. One more thing, she said. She nodded toward the far corner of the room, where an old, upright piano waited, painted in soft yellow, slightly out of tune, but still proud. And sitting at it was Emily. She glanced at her dad, grinning. Ready, she called out. Ben's eyes widened. We didn't rehearse. She laughed. You never stopped singing it anyway. Then, with hands still learning where the keys belonged, she began to play. Soft, imperfect, beautiful. You are my sunshine. Ben exhaled and walked to the mic. He looked around the room at the vets wiping their eyes, the nurses who had once ignored him, the little girl smiling behind the piano. And then he sang, My only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Amelia joined in. Her voice, lower now weathered, wove itself into the melody like an old ribbon through a new tree. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. And by the last line, everyone was singing. Some off-key, some too quietly to hear. But all together, a harmony of the forgotten, the healed, the still fighting. Please don't take my sunshine away. When the final note faded, no one clapped. They simply stood and felt. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the last guests filtered out, Ben walked to the rear hallway where a small exhibit had been installed. Photographs lined the wall. Amelia in her first physical therapy session. Ben holding Emily at the center's groundbreaking, a still frame from room 407, where a hand finally gripped back, and at the end of the hallway was a framed journal page, worn yellowed handwritten. The caption read, Day 1, 21 p.m., subject Janitor Amelia Brooks, left eyelid movement, slight jaw response, 2x during melody, monitor spike, Sorndio by course 1 BPM, no medical acknowledgement, no next of kin presence, unsupervised, try again. Ben stood there a long time. Then he pulled a pen from his pocket and just beneath the glass added 3 final words. She came back. As he walked outside into the cool evening air, Emily ran up behind him, the music box in her hands. Play it again, Daddy, she said. He turned the crank. The melody played one more time, rising softly into the twilight. Ben smiled, because he knew now. Some songs never end. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Are you here in the US or tuning in from somewhere else in the world? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. And if this story touched your heart or reminded you that kindness still matters, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more quiet, powerful tales like this. Thank you for spending your time with us. It means more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and stay hopeful.